So you have to keep your brain waves in sync, in rhythm, or synchronized regularly. It has to be in your routine, if you will. To the point where you do it enough to pretty much wake yourself or keep yourself on rhythm, just because you naturally have the desire to stay in the rhythm or keep the rhythm, and that pretty much automatically is like an automatic function of your consciousness. It's something that you do kind of as almost as a stress response, or a boredom response, or a low creativity response, or a low inspiration, to the point where it becomes your natural, not even a resistance, but it's a response that it's like it's almost like a synesthetic, I guess I want to say that. It's like a sense that takes care of the processing of the darkness for you in a way. But that's really just creativity. You know, what we are looking at is creativity and the amount of inspiration one can give to themselves. And that kind of internal loopiness, which is almost what it is. I guess it's not loopiness. The kind of internal self-resonance of our own ability to process feeling, which is or to know feeling, or to know the self through feeling, which is going to result basically in your ability to change the way you perceive yourself moving through time. And therefore, if you can more or less influence that more than the environment influences that, or controls that, or manipulates that, then no one can manipulate you. And in that sense, this world doesn't manipulate you. And that's just a simple, concept. It doesn't have to be miraculous, at least not from the ground level perspective that people have in modern society, which is actually below ground, because people have less sense in the visible aspects of this waking society, so-called society, than what you would expect in I don't know how to say that. I guess it's as if the aspects of this life that people consider to be that which separates them from the animals and makes them wakeful and above ground is actually the stuff that defines the animals below ground. And so then we haven't really been able to see the light yet. And this is part of it. So the real world is pretty much, and this is, my kind of viewpoint on how to understand what we don't really see properly in the world, in terms of just the perceptual illusions and the social and cultural biases that are inherent and to a point natural in a way to the learning process of the self, not like of, we shouldn't be biased to the point where we don't know how the world is, like we can't decide on how the world is to the point where then we can't live in the same world because of that. That a level of bias and learning is insanity, because it derives from not lack of learning, but direct, obscene, explicit deception. And so then it doesn't result in learning. Beyond that, it results in either the creation or the destruction of that process. Meaning that if we learn from oppression and deception, then we always have to learn that way. But if we learn by rejecting it, and it learns from us in that sense, it kind of turns around. But the point is, that's already what it is anyway, because you can never say, oh, well, because a bunch of people were deceived, and therefore now deception is true. No, it doesn't work that way. In reality, where there was only the deceivers and themselves, but, you can't push it to the limit, and then if it doesn't work, change the game and continue to do that, because that runs out, and then eventually that system that's used to do that is no longer around. So it's all about self-sustaining processes And the consciousness, the body, the mind is all supposed to be, well, I don't know what it's supposed to be, maybe not supposed to be, but in terms of what you would want intelligence to be able to do is to function in a way that accurately views the world and views its own place in that world to get a larger view of reality. It seems as if our wires are kind of crossed, and the brain is even kind of formatted like that with, you know, certain aspects of your biology. But you know, I've talked about that a little bit before with the hemispheres and the optic chasm and the nerves and all that stuff. And so then the society seemingly, like you can imagine the brain is supposed to be whole in a sense, and I drew something like this last time. I guess these are stupid shapes again, but that's what we're doing here. And okay, actually, well, I guess you could do it anyway. Well, I'm thinking of kind of a circle shape or something for consciousness. But then with the shapes that I was doing before, where it was kind of like a house or honestly a phallic symbol, if you draw it out, which might have, you know, something to do with stuff like that. I mean, all those, the angles and geometry behind symbolism relating to consciousness, not the body though. That's the vulgar. It's the secret that it's not the body, because it's everything invisible that's beyond the body, and then so by pretending it's just some big dense concept, the people that are too dense to get it use it in the wrong ways, but then those people are trying to change the truth by using it in the wrong way to take over to the point, and you get the point. And so maybe that's the point, that it is a mixture of both shapes here. And the degree, you know, there's just curved feminine lines and straight right angle geometry. And again, that's the spirit feminine in the matrix matter grid, if you will. A little lag. And so then I drew this last time, and we're doing this again. Like oh no. Something kind of like this, in that it was as if, and maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Isn't that interesting? It's as if we're supposed to kind of like gather our intelligence, if you will, mentally and emotionally, left and right, and it moves forwards towards a point, and we have a focal point of what we can see. And maybe in the sense that's the opposite way, in that it comes to a point but doesn't expand beyond that, whereas this way kind of has a wide view that can create a scope, which can then kind of like view, instead of being a laser, but something like a spotlight or an inverted cone, or it shines out. The point is, and then so the other metaphor is that the hemispheres, if this is like left and right hemisphere of the brain, it's as if they can only see outward, in that they were altered, or something was done so that the communication, you know, like ability between them was lessened, and this kind of equates to the ability to see within the self, you know, if you will. To the point where there's like no feedback, to the point where we could only see out. Sorry, something's lagging me out. And we couldn't curve that back and kind of dream of our own awareness. The masculine can't curve its own straight line to see itself and kind of break that rigid ego structure, and the feminine, if you will, couldn't look back within itself to, well, I guess maybe the feminine at that point could only see the self, in that the value here is in the self, then the value here is out in the world, and so then you combine the two and you can see what happened. But then with a complete imbalance of over masculinity, you would see what would happen with the circle. The circle would be conformed too heavy to the rigid lines, and it would probably become something like that. And then the world that's like that not that it's got to be 3D or flat, but that it is curvy, becomes, you know, kind of rigid like that. And so then that process is shattering now, boom, boom, boom. And now there's people there that all look some way similar, but then in some way, each of us has broken aspects that are going back to wholeness, however that's going to work, with your mind going back together. But the point is, it's as if what happens here, it's traumatic to see what we are there, and it's almost as if it's traumatic for the feminine to see what's going on out there. It's kind of weird to put it that way, but that's kind of how it seems to feel. But in the sense, I don't think like removing our brain hemispheres and spinning them around is the way to do it. And there's that other one. If I remember, that was in the other. Well, I don't think it goes like that. Nope, not like that. How does it? Anyway, and that was in the other video. But no more of those. I mean, as many as you want, but so and then there goes that. And what is that? And the clock. Anyway, I'm just getting carried away with these here shapes. And so the idea is that we have to have some way to see back in. And so then if they can see out, you see, then we can see in. You put the two together, blah, 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 like that. But, and I guess you would, you start with, anyway, you go from there, and then where you draw from there, you expand and get bigger geometry. But that's the point. If the feminine, this is not what I meant to talk about, just brain hemispheres, but the feminine doesn't look out, it looks in, and the core is there. The masculine looks out and fucks around there, and so then they meet, and you guess what happens. And so then that's the way the hemispheres rotate back together, by being a reflection of one another. And so then as well, you imagine they're multiplied kind of in duplex by one another, or maybe multiplex. It's kind of like the, you know, standard basic, what's it called? 4D, however it goes, blah, 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 thing. It's almost as if that's what's happening with, maybe even like a 5, oopsies. Oh, shit. When that happens. Yeah, quit this out. Maybe that's a 5D combining with the 5D, or maybe this is 4D. That'd be interesting. And then to the point where, and I guess it's actually 5D, I'd say, both, but it just depends on the people, kind of in the sense of cultures and races and basically genetic experiments that are going on. But in that sense, so then 4D is timeline to tree, and it's more or less unchanging. It's kind of like a flat character, in the sense that it can't branch out more than there are nodes on the tree, and the nodes have to be kind of built in for when the seed is created, if you will. And so then the complexity can go from there, but it can't add to it. Then 5D, I don't know why it says that, BP, whatever. It's basically 4-dimensional patterns that are, and it's like set in stone. And then 5D is also the other gem that had it this way in time and this way in time. And if your consciousness is basically somebody traveling along here, to somebody aware enough to make the decisions to change these, to all the way up to becoming everything. But the point is, at this point in time for this civilization and society and where we're at, 5D is basically being able to see beyond the mental, emotional boundaries that are created for you in your mind by the bias of your cultural upbringing and all the things you could blame, if you will, your education, in a way, your intelligence. You could call it a bunch of things, But ultimately, this is all about knowledge, self-knowledge, intelligence, the amount of accuracy your consciousness actually has, that it pertains to in reality, to the point where we're either living in reality or we're not. And it's got to the point, we got to use weird ways of describing it. So because bad things happened long ago in time, humanity was supposed to be at this level of intelligence. As a result, they wanted to keep people bouncing around in these silly layers forever. Humanity has to go from here to here in a very short amount of time. And the only way to do it is an exponential curve. It's so far out that any measurement grid that we can conceive at the beginning level becomes obsolete anywhere near the top, to the point where it doesn't function to say that we can mentally map out even the concept of how far it is. And it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means we're moving in a rate of change that is beyond the rate of change that is used to define our consciousness, and therefore we're going beyond any point in consciousness previously. And so that's kind of like the idea. And then the idea is like, how hard did it go from, your childhood up until facing what you have to face now in reality, and up to 5 years ago up until now. So imagine that, times 1,000. But it's not to make it look bad. It's so it starts, and it started already. But the point is to do this without inducing any type of illness or syndrome, which would be seen as a kind of spiritual syndrome. Or basically it's almost like certain effects that are developed that pertain to biology and the mind and the function of the biology to enable higher and lower states of consciousness. They can all be mitigated, but the point is to remain, or to keep the wisdom, is to keep the progress of what you were doing here into what you're doing in the future. One way to look at that is to say everything that you're doing here is pretty much forever. And so what you have to do here is more or less map yourself out to be able to use the consciousness that you have here in situations that continue forever. Plan if everything you heard was a lie and you have to map yourself out, because whether you go one way, and this is pertaining to east and west, or the other, which may be another way of seeing things, whatever people do here, this kind of artificial consciousness infrastructure that's been on repeat, sealed off in time, okay, we're 1,000,000 miles out from where we would be if we joined wherever our civilization would be, depending on whether we went in one way or another. So as soon as we leave this matrix frozen time zone, it's literally a hyperbolic acceleration time tunnel into whatever locale we're moving into. That's the whole concept. And so the whole point is they froze time. To undo that would literally be like slingshotting us one way or another in the future. or the past, and that's the point. If some people go to the future faster than others, now that creates this kind of negative effect, this vacuum between them that acts as a contrast, kind of it creates contrast. It's a difference, maybe a not differential, and this would create, it would ultimately take a longer time overall, because basically imagine two things kind of pulling, and then you get momentum, and then you get wasted energy on both of them, and they go overall less distance away from another, like two pool balls going together or something, or tied together with a string and going trying to separate. So the idea is to go as more or less one group in the same direction to the point where everybody more or less goes outside of the frozen time grid. Everybody gets to a level of self-awareness exponentially greater than what we're doing more or less right now, managing the beginning phases and stages of that. And in that sense, that's pretty much it. I mean, well, so you could say it's like this. Come on. Let me clear that. Well, let me. It's like, so we're like, there, ground, nice and groundy. We're there. Okay, that's just, so you have to, so weird. You kind of have to point your vector. However, if it's a time tunnel, you'd have to where you're looking left and right hemispheres would have to literally hit the center to the point where this is literally like 1 billion years difference, or intensity levels of literally way more than that, lives, moments, whatever you want to call it. So if you have a wavering thought that takes you this way, an intent, a distraction, a less than 100% accurate view of yourself and what you want, what your goal is, if there's anything else on the side throwing shit in your way, parasitic, basically interdimensional parasites in your brain, which we call bad dreams or naughty desires or mental illness, like for instance psychopathy and schizophrenia, the effects on memory and so on. If we were energy in the sense, we would look at that like something was eating us. Either way, in the sense of this huge shift, okay, it means every single filament that comes out of our heart connects to a reality. And if they go this way on some ways, well, 1 billion years later, there's going to be a reality like this and like that. And it's completely, there's a gap between them. And if part of your soul's over here and part of your soul's over here, you're going to have a consciousness level way below. That's kind of like what it is. So we're, it all goes to one, and then the consciousness is where it should be. And at that point, more things happen. But that's kind of the point. You have to be very still and calm and have no effort, basically. In that sense, you're not doing anything, but what you're being with all of your being, all of your mind, and more so all of your feeling, because you're not really thinking it, because it's not a process. And it's kind of how that works. Okay.